First of all, thank you all for being here. I'm really thrilled at this turnout. Thank you to the Brooks Memorial Library and to BCTV for being here. My name is Moss Linder. With my wife, who's not quite here yet, Elizabeth, we are both physicians. I'm a family doctor at Grace Cottage Hospital in Townsend. For those of you who don't know, Grace Cottage Hospital is an 18-bed critical access hospital. It's been there for 65 years. We have a variety of services, including primary care, inpatient services for acutely ill and rehabilitation patients, emergency room services. We have a robust behavioral health program. We have physical therapy. We have occupational therapy, pharmacy, and a very vibrant community health program. About 10 years ago, we started a 5K, which is called the Spring into Health 5K. This year, as a special guest, I want to introduce Amby Burfoot. Most of you are here because you've already heard of Amby Burfoot. But Amby hails from Groton, Connecticut. He burst upon the world of running, winning the Boston Marathon as a student at Wesleyan University, my alma mater.
Go West.
And then he also became legendary in writing as a journalist and ultimately editor of Runner's World with a career spanning over 4 decades. He's written several books and quite possibly knows more about running and fitness than anybody. And so it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our special guest to the 5K and to the Brooks Library, Amby Burfoot.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction, Moss.
Don't stand in front of the slide.
Don't stand in front of the slide. How about, do we want lights down in the room or lights up, or is this good?
Get him down.
We can turn them off. I think we're...
If you turn them off, all I'll see is the slides. I won't see you.
Oh, okay.
Well, that was good.
The TV guy is controlling things. They always do, you know. There's $100 from
Well,
NBC.
let's make sure we can see Amby. Sorry.
Yeah, good.
Down one is good.
First thing I want to say is that I am here today not because your local hospital took your money and wrote me a big check to be here. They didn't. I'm here because Moss is an alumnus of Wesleyan University, as I am, as Bill Rogers is, as 2 presidential candidates are. I just learned this week that 2 of our people were running for president. Of course, who isn't? And so I wanted to come and honor Moss's contribution to this community and to this race. He told me a couple of days ago what a typical night in the emergency room was like for him. And I won't repeat the stories because you don't want to know what he has to do on a typical night in the emergency room, but it was pretty surprising from a small community like this. And also because I love Vermont, of course, and haven't been here for many years. I know John Dimmick and a few other folks from 40 or 50 years ago when we used to travel all over New England and run road races in all the communities. But I stay around Mystic these days for the most part, so it's nice to get away up here. I'm going to tell you the story of my life. Sorry about that. In short, in quick today, I actually have a lot of slides because they do add a little bit of color that I really can't convey to you without some pictures. But I'm going to go through them quickly, more quickly than I'm speaking now. I promise not to tarry on anything so long that it will bore you to tears. There are a couple of good stories along the way about how I ran with Hollywood celebrities. I don't care about fast runners like John. I'm only interested in Hollywood celebrities. So I'll stop for a few minutes with those stories, but otherwise we'll move quickly and with a little message perhaps, but I'm not going to hang too long on anything. Run for your best life, my talk. You want to know anything about me, like my age? I was born on the same day and year as President Bill Clinton, August 19th, 1946, in case you want to remember that important day. So someone made a card for me on our mutual 50th birthday. I've done other presidential duty in elementary schools on Lincoln's and President's birthdays. This wasn't one of my better moments, but I did it anyway. This picture is an illustration of the way all runners began back in the day when John and I were starting in high school. I ran my first several weeks in high-topped Keds basketball shoes because my parents were lower middle class. They weren't going to waste $6 on a pair of cross-country shoes for me, so I had to wear my basketball shoes. When it came the day of my first race in cross-country, I thought, well, I gotta have something light and sleek and wonderful to run my first cross-country race in, not high-top basketball shoes. I rummaged through all the closets in the house, and I came up with this, a pair of bowling shoes. I ran my first cross-country race in bowling shoes. In case you've never noticed it, bowling is an indoor sport. When you take your bowling shoes outdoors and run a cross-country race on a wet day, they delaminate, which means the soles come off, and I crossed the finish line with my soles whacking in the wet grass. I was extraordinarily lucky that my high school coach was the 1957 Boston Marathon winner, John J. Kelly. Also represented the U.S. in 2 Olympics, 1960, 1956, and 1960. Was clearly the best runner in the country for a decade or so, from 10 miles to the marathon. Just by chance, the cross-country coach at my high school, where I, by chance, gave up basketball and other sports and decided to go into cross-country myself. Briefly, what was most important to me about Kelly was not that he was fast, that was nice, but he was the most intelligent, forward-thinking man I have ever known in my life. In the 50s and early 60s, he was an organic gardener. Trust me, nobody else knew about organic gardening in the 50s and 60s. He had a compost pile out back. Nobody had those. He rode his bicycle to work rather than driving to work in a polluting vehicle because he wanted to preserve the environment. He was a super environmentalist. He was a literature student. He had a philosophy of life, which was really what inflamed me and pointed me in a direction as much as his running advice did. Here he is winning the 1957 Boston Marathon, the only member ever of the sponsoring organization, the BAA, to win their own marathon right up to this day. My first Boston was in 1965. Welcome to Hopkinton, where it all begins. I was a freshman in college, and look, I snuck into the results in 25th place with a 2:34 in my first marathon. It seemed an absolute breeze because I had built the marathon up into a Himalayan trek in my mind, so 26 miles seemed like nothing. Every year I've been back since then, it's been much, much harder. However, 3 years later, I did have the unbelievable good fortune to be running at the front of the Boston Marathon as the two of us went over the top of Heartbreak Hill with a press bus in the background. I was sure I was going to lose the race at this point because the fellow next to me was someone I'd raced quite a bit. He'd raced me. He knew he always finished faster than I did. I knew he always finished faster than I did. I figured I was going to be second. He was going to be win, and he was going to win. Second isn't quite as nice as first, even though it's great, but I was lucky enough that he cramped on the downhills at Boston, which if you are a real runner, you know the downhills are often more of a problem than the uphills. And so I was able to make it to the finish line and win in 1968. That's an important date. We'll come back to it. I show this picture only because I love the cameras of yesteryear versus the digital iPhones and whatnot of today. There was plenty of excitement, plenty of coverage, and plenty of energy at the finish line of the Boston Marathon, even in 1968. Boston was Boston. There was nothing else like it. Everybody who ran in New England and most of the country went to the Boston Marathon because it was our Olympics. A few years later, my college roommate was Bill Rogers on the right, who went on to super fame with 4 Boston wins and 4 New York City wins. Also a Wesleyan graduate like Moss and I, and Bill and I have remained very, very good friends to this day and see each other 5 or 6 times during the year. I've had a lot of good, unique running experiences in my life. This is the Comrades Marathon in South Africa, which I've run twice. I can't believe to tell you all the things, I can't begin to tell you all the things about this race, which I consider the world's greatest foot race. It's 54 miles, but that's the least of it. 20,000 South Africans run it, but that's the least of it. It's shown on national TV for 9 hours in South Africa. Every single person in South Africa knows as much about the Comrades Marathon as people here know about the Super Bowl or the Final Four. It's a huge event. Several of the things that I like the best are, one, the course reverses direction year to year. It's as if the Boston Marathon on alternate years ran from downtown Boston to Hopkinton. That's exactly what the 54-mile Comrades course does. And people don't try to run fast at Comrades, they try to come back year after year, because after 5 years they give you a color-coded number, green, and after 10 it's orange, and after 15 it's gold. And the color of your number means much, much more. The number of Comrades you've run means much, much more than how fast you are. And was this 93? I ran the marathon with Oprah. This is Oprah's one marathon. She, to this day, is the most famous person to have run the marathon distance, and other famous people have done it. We knew she was going to run the Chicago Marathon because she has production and everything else in Chicago, and everybody was getting excited about her running in Chicago. So she tricked us all by showing up the week before Chicago at the Washington, D.C. Marine Corps Marathon. Very well known, but not as well known as the Chicago Marathon. The National Enquirer had been intending to cover her wherever she ran, because she was subject number 1 to the National Enquirer. They were surprised when she switched to Washington, D.C. No doubt that's why she switched, but they were very impressive journalistically. They flew in photographers and journalists from around the country the last second and just were at her side every step of the way. I was there to speak, as I'm speaking now. Had no idea Oprah was going to be there until the day before the race. When I learned that she was, I thought, well, heck, I'm the editor of Runner's World. Oprah's the most famous person ever to run a marathon. I guess I'd better run it with her and write an article about it. So I got in behind her and followed a discreet, quiet 10 yards behind her the whole race. Until the middle of the race, the National Enquirer guy in front there, who was a real runner, told her, hey, you know, there's this Boston Marathon winner right in back, and she turned around, looked for me, and held out a hand, and I ran up and got a handshake, and her and the National Enquirer photographers later sent me this. Oprah ran and finished in 4:30. It was actually the most impressive marathon I've ever seen. It was not the fastest, obviously, but it seemed like 10,000 runners came up to her during the race and pounded her on the shoulder. Hey, Oprah, you're an inspiration. We love you. Great. Love your show. Keep going. The beginning of the race, she was very politely turning around and greeting. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, you can imagine what she's doing after 20 miles. Get the hell out of me, you know? But she didn't do that. She kept running. She finished strong. We put her on the cover of Runner's World. I figured I would probably get fired for that decision because there are, sadly, no African-American marathon women in the country. Not none, but very few, and even fewer in 1994. Of course, it was the best-selling issue in the history of Runner's World. A few years later came the 100th Boston Marathon in 1996. This is probably the best issue of Runner's World we ever did because it had so much great history in it. My favorite is the great women who have been part of the Boston Marathon history. A few of you know the names. From the left, Nina Cusick, Catherine Switzer, Joan Benoit Samuelson, and Roberta Gibb. For this photo, they all dressed more or less as they had dressed when they were running the Boston Marathon, so it was neat to get them together for such a classy photo. In 2003, I was on the celebrity watch still. I ran the marathon not only with Elvis on the left, but that's the real Will Ferrell, the tall guy with the bushy hair in the middle. Will Ferrell, the comedian, Will Ferrell, Saturday Night Live, Will Ferrell, all the movies you've seen, and most of which he takes his clothes off and shows you his jiggly, big gut and things like that. The fellow on the right who looks like me is my nephew, who's dressed the way I looked in 1968. He surprised me that morning by dressing like this, and surprised me at breakfast. I no longer looked like that, but he did the 1968 costume in 2003. Will Ferrell's celebrity Hollywood coach had been calling me for months saying, "Hey, Runner's World, Will Ferrell's gonna run, you should do a story on Will Ferrell," and I get the calls, and I'm like, hello, Hollywood celebrity coach? I talk to Olympic coaches. I talk to coaches of guys who run a 2:10 marathon. I don't talk to Will Ferrell, celebrity coach. He kept calling, and at some point I finally said, okay, keep talking. So what kind of pace is Will Ferrell gonna run? He said he's gonna run 4 hours. I've trained him to run a 4-hour marathon, which is pretty respectable. And that's when it occurred to me, hey, I'm going to run a 4-hour marathon. I'm entered in this race because 2003, do the math, is 35 years since 1968. And at this point, I'm running Boston every 5th year. So I'm running, Will Ferrell's running, I'm going to run 4 hours like clockwork. You better believe I'm going to run 4 hours. Will Ferrell's celebrity coach says he's going to run 4 hours. There we are in the middle of the race. I'm in the blue. Will Ferrell and his celebrity coach are right behind me. It's one of those sunny days in Boston. As you can see, there's no shade on the trees, no leaves. He's dressed in all Hollywood celebrity black. Great color for a sunny, hot day, right? The early miles, I ran behind him and watched the river of sweat cascading down his back. And I knew it was a sure thing that he wasn't going to get very far. But he hung in for 10 miles. And then he disappeared, and I thought, that's about as far as a Hollywood celebrity gets. The next 10 miles, I'm looking forward to the top of Heartbreak Hill because my wife, who's in the back, and my daughter are going to meet me at the top of Heartbreak Hill and run the last 5 miles with me. It's going to be a celebrity run. We're going to take it nice and easy. We had trained my daughter to run at 4-hour pace. She wasn't really a runner, but she could handle 9 minutes and 10 seconds. So I'm running up Heartbreak Hill, 10 miles later. I see my wife, I see my daughter, I'm just thrilled. We're going to have this wonderful reunion. I run over to give them big hugs, and Will Ferrell comes steaming by us on the inside track running 8:40 pace. So, much to my surprise, Will Ferrell has really hung in there. He's run a smart race, and now he's going faster than at any point in the race. I take off after him and leave my wife and my daughter in the distance. My wife, who is a runner, runs up to me and says, Amby, what's going on here? And I say, come on, we're going to run with Will Ferrell. We want to be Hollywood celebrities. We'll get in all the come on, let's run with Will Ferrell. And my wife says, well, you can run with Will Ferrell, but I've got just one thought for you. Your daughter and I are going to run the pace we're supposed to run. We're not going to try and run Will Ferrell's pace. And the only decision you have to make is who's more important to you, Will Ferrell or me and your daughter. And I'll leave you with one parting thought, which is that I think we will love you a lot longer than Will Ferrell will. So I stroked my chinny chin and thought about the Will Ferrell celebrity route and the family daughter, father, husband route. And I think I made the right decision. I ran with my wife and the gang. There's the not me on the left and the real me in the middle and my wife and daughter. And we had a wonderful race. And Will Ferrell, darn him, ran negative splits and finished in 3:57. We finished in 3:59 and did what we were supposed to do. 2010, now we're going forward a bit, was the 2500th, I can't say it, anniversary of the Diffity's legendary run from Marathon to Athens, and you know the story, he supposedly drops dead. But every marathoner in the world wanted to go to Athens and run this celebration race in 2010. and that included me. The 2,500 years old is not me, although I may look like it. That's a reference to Phidippides. But my wife, who has many talents, made me a sort of a Phidippides warrior outfit to wear. And Sports Illustrated somehow got into this and did this fantastic photo of me on a hillside overlooking the Parthenon, the Acropolis, etc., that actually ran in the marathon in Sports Illustrated that fall. It wasn't quite their swimsuit issue, but it was as good as it gets for me. The New York Times also got wind of this and took photos of us, my brother on the left and my son, the big guy, on the right, at the beach where I live in Mystic. We all went and ran the race. It was a long story, I'm not going to tell you, but everybody finished, everybody was happy afterwards, and we all got our garlands and had a nice time in Athens afterwards. And for all the good work that my wife did, that put me in my usual position with regard to her kissing her feet. I also run with my daughter. Here she is in the middle with after a half marathon that we ran in Pennsylvania a few years ago. None of my kids are big runners, no lying about that, but they enjoy staying healthy and running occasionally, and every once in a while we figure out an event that will be fun to do together. This is one of the books I've got in the back of the room. I was lucky that my running days coincided with the beginning of the women's running movement in this country in the 60s and 70s, so I knew them all and became friends with all of them, and at some point realized that while people knew about Joan Benoit Samuelson and Catherine Switzer and a few others, there were several dozen that deserved to be told in the same volume, and so that's what I did with this book. A couple of my favorite women's running photos. This is 1961. The woman on the right is a very, very good friend of ours and lives near us. Her name is Julia Chase Brand, and she tried to run this 5-mile race in 1960, really early, a famous 5-mile race in Hartford. They said, no, women can't run. The AAU won't let you. Go away, be a nice girl and go away. First year, and they said, come back next year, sign up early, maybe we'll reconsider. So she went away quietly the first year. Next year she comes back with the signature, the registration, her doctor's certificate, her mother's note, everything in the world you could possibly have. And in the end, the race director still said, get off the road, get on the sidewalk. You can't run, we're going to put on our race. She was not a nice girl this time. She jumped into the road, ran the race, finished it in 1961, ran about 7-minute, 10-second pace. She was a real runner. She looks great, as you can see in this photo. That's her Smith College tunic. She went to Smith. That was her gym class tunic. And 50 years later, she showed up at the same race in the same tunic and ran it a little bit slower. And I ran it with her that day, and it was very good fun. She's a wonderful, inspirational person. She's got a PhD in zoology after finishing college. 20 years later, she got tired of her PhD, so in her mid-50s, she went to medical school and got a medical degree and became a psychiatrist for the last 20 years of her life. This is perhaps my favorite running photo of all time. On the right is Roberta Gibb, a mile from the finish of the Boston Marathon in 1966. That's when she hid in the bulrushes because they wouldn't give her a number. She ran the whole race. She ran great. She ran smooth. She ran fast, like 3:30 or 3:40. And in those days, there used to be a station wagon at the back of the race. We generally called it the meat wagon. Something like that. That's where the guys who dropped out and couldn't cover the distance, they climbed into the meat wagon and they got carted to the finish line, and then they could pick up their stuff. Well, these guys in the meat wagon had just suddenly realized or been told that not only did they not finish the marathon, but a woman is finishing the marathon on this day. And so they're looking, you can sort of see the energy. They're like popping their heads out and thinking, holy crap, what's going on? And how am I going to tell my friends back home that I got beaten by a woman in the Boston Marathon? This is how the Boston press greeted her, of course, hug bride, etc., etc. She went on and ran 2 more Bostons and won the next 2 Bostons and is still active in running. My most frequent road race has been the Manchester 5-miler on Thanksgiving Day. That was where I showed you the picture of the girl being told, no, get off the road, in 1961. I ran my first in 1963, and I haven't missed one since. So I think I've got 55 or 56 in a row without missing one of these races now, which is really my proudest feat. One year they had these, it's not a real statue, but they had these plaster of Paris statues, and I liked this guy because he had a little bit more muscle than me, so get into a picture. I've been running this race long enough so that fellow runners have had children who they decided to name after me. This is little Amby 6 or 7 years ago. Cute photo. This is little Amby last year wearing one of my hats, and I think his parents are going to let him run the race for the first time in the next couple of years. They gave me the Amby's 51st hat 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been adding numbers and scratching them off ever since then. As I said, I think I'm up to 56 straight. I consider the kind of endurance that it takes to run the same annual race 56 years in a row more of an achievement than winning the Boston Marathon, frankly. This is the weirdest sight I ever saw in my life in a road race in 2013. I've got a mile to go in the Boston Marathon. It's my 45th anniversary race from 1968. I can't wait to finish. Suddenly, there's no race anymore. Everyone's just standing in the middle of the road. We have no idea what's going on. Here's another view of it. Some of you are remembering now that this was the year of the bombing in 2013, and indeed, I was old and slow then, so I was well back in the pack, and I was in the 5,000 or so runners who were stopped and were simply not allowed to go to the finish line of the Boston Marathon that year because of what had happened there. What was weird for us is, even though we were only a mile away, we didn't hear anything, we didn't see anything, we didn't know anything. They simply said, sorry, Boston Marathon's over, you can't run. We were not too happy about that, to tell you the truth. By the time you've run 25 miles, you know you're going to be able to finish, and you really want to go down that last mile and collect your medal and all of that stuff. And of course, when we finally found out what had happened, we felt, certainly I felt, quite chagrined for our ego involvement in wanting to finish the Boston Marathon when there were tragedies at the finish line. Some of us after this race thought, oh my God, this must be the end of running, because running is a public event. You can't protect any race anywhere from crazy people, people who will do harm. What if nobody ever wants to run the Boston Marathon or any other race again? That sort of uncertainty lasted like 48 hours at most, and then suddenly we all realized that we wanted to run the next year's Boston Marathon more than we had ever wanted to run any race in our lives, to show our resilience, to show that we weren't going to let terrorists stop us, to show the people of Boston how much we appreciated them for putting on this wonderful race for so many years. So the next year, the race was indeed a massive celebration of resiliency and trying to return to normal. My wife and I, people at the church at the finish line knitted 7,000 of these blue and yellow scarves called peace scarves, and they gave them out free at the finish line for days in advance of the race. I ran down there wanting one, thinking I was going to have to pay $50 for it, and was stunned when it turned out they were free. And damn, I was going to bring mine tonight. It's really my most treasured running memento. The race was the most spirited, the highest energy, the best Boston Marathon ever. In fact, no race can ever match this because it can never have the emotion of that day's race. The runners were in such a celebrity mood, wanting to thank all the people of Boston again for their support. People of Boston turned out as never before to cheer for the runners. My wife and I were reunited at the finish line after we finished, and so it was a happy day for us. I ran with the MR8 singlet, that's Martin Richard, and 8 was his favorite number. Martin's the young boy who was killed the previous year by the bomb, who made this famous little poster. I believe he made this right after Sandy Hook, so it would have been about 3 months earlier. No more hurting people. Peace. As I ran the Boston Marathon that year, and for the next 6 years, I passed out cards thanking the Boston Marathon fans for their support and cheering and making Boston the greatest marathon, because the people are so great. And I would give these to little kids along the route, and every once in a while somebody would take a photo of their kid with my card and send it to me, so I've got some nice photos. All of this from 2013 to 2018 was my getting ready to run 2018. Math again, 1968, 2018, it's my 50th anniversary. And like everyone, I look forward to anniversary races. I have been envisioning my 50th anniversary for years. It was sort of like my Will Ferrell thing. I thought there would be sunlight and cameras and celebrity, and here comes Amby running on his 50th anniversary. Isn't that cool? Instead, it was literally the worst weather in the entire 122-year history of the Boston Marathon. This is what I looked like on the starting line with 5 or 6 of my friends who ran with me. It was cold, it was rainy, it was windy in our face. I was literally afraid of hypothermia. There was basically nothing that was going to stop me from finishing on my 50th anniversary if I could just keep plodding along. But if I got hypothermic, too cold, that kind of can put an end to you whether you want to or not. My brother barely made it. He got hypothermic midway and was just about to drop out when one of our group spotted a discarded raincoat on the side of the road, ran over, got the raincoat, wrapped it around my brother. He warmed up a little and was able to finish. This is what we all looked like at the finish. That's me, my friend John Valentine from Vermont, just up the road. And this is my brother on the right, and me and John. And you can just see we were wrapped in everything we could possibly put around us that day. My wife had the good sense not to run, but she was there to celebrate with me at the end. So it was a great 50th anniversary, even if it was not Hollywood sunlight going through it. This is my most recent book, which has a ridiculous cover title, but of course I realize none of us are going to run forever, but I figure we might as well be bold in our efforts to stay fit as long as we possibly can. I'm not sure this slide works at all. I like to remind people that's a Kalahari bushman on the hunt and actually running down an antelope and then spearing it for dinner. And we were literally born to run, and there's some pretty good evidence and video of African bushmen doing exactly this and running down high-calorie prey, which they needed. You all know this is closer to the society that we live in today, and my message when I go out and speak to people more about the health aspects, of course, is that running and fitness can be a tremendous antidote to the polluted food environment that exists all around us. One of my great heroes is Dr. Walter Bortz. He and his wife ran Boston together in their 80th year. They're the only people anywhere who've run, well, married anyway, who've run together in their 80th year. And I love this statement: it's never too late to start, and it's always too soon to stop. I'm actually going to skip this one because I have talked to you for too long already. My motto these days is every day is a new adventure and every mile is a gift, and I feel so lucky to be here tonight with you and to be running with you tomorrow. I look forward to it. I hope I'll see some of you again tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. And I suppose I can see if there are any questions. And if anyone would like a book, I can autograph a book in the back afterwards. Questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'm curious, Amby, in your decades of running and...
Thank you for reminding me how old I am.
And writing about running,
Yeah.
thinking about running, training, coaching. If you could comment on some of the evolution that's happened over that time in terms of approaches to fitness and approaches to high caliber racing, and maybe even some of the things that we've had to unlearn during that time. It's faddish things that have come and gone over the years.
Well, it's certainly a mixed bag, and there's no question but that tracks are a lot faster now than they were. My high school track had cinders this big on it, and you could roll an ankle in a track race, never mind having something good underfoot. And I have not had the pleasure, I guess, of running in the infamous new Nike shoe, which people say is legitimately several percent faster, and that's a real difference. So equipment changes and moves forward for certain. I don't think there are any other new secrets that are worth anything. I think everybody's got this training philosophy and that plan and this plan and intervals and tempos and whatnot, and it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. I mean, everybody who makes it to the top runs 100 miles a week because you can't make it running 20 miles a week, and everybody who makes it to the top runs hard workouts, but a lot of not so hard workouts because you can't run 100 miles if they're all hard. And everybody who makes it to the top has got more talent than your average runner. And talent's a very, very difficult thing because none of us know what it's like to be inside anybody else's body. And I always tell people that, that I'm a no-talent runner. The only thing I was ever any good at was distance. I've been in a physiology lab. I have a physical capacity to run at a higher body temperature than most people, and dehydration doesn't bother me a bit. I don't never drink anything when I'm running, which drives people crazy. So I have talents. Running fast is, to me a fast mile or 5K is talent. And when I talk to people about my running career, I finally figured out how to describe it a couple of years ago, and that is I had just enough talent so I got to run against some people with names like Jim Ryan and Jerry Lindgren. And when you run against that caliber of individual, you realize there's talent above your level because those guys can fly, and there's nothing I could ever have done. Training, nutrition, nothing else could ever have made me as fast as Jim Ryan and Jerry Lindgren. Some of you in this room could never be as fast as I was, no matter what you ate or trained, because, my talent is up there, it's just not at the sky level. Yeah.
Yeah, Amby, as you had such a long career in running, what do you attribute your longevity to, particularly as you think about the last decade and experience of aging? What allows you to keep going without breaking down?
Yeah, I think, I should have mentioned that previously, I think I was born lucky. I mean, I did have to have a knee scoped 10 years ago, but I bounced back from that pretty quickly. Otherwise, I don't have any orthopedic problems. And today, right now, I could go out there and sprint full tilt down the street. I wouldn't in fact be moving very fast, but my body would be going as hard as it could without all of the knees and hips and backs and things that people have. And honestly, I didn't do anything to deserve that. If I had some kind of copyrighted system, I'd sell it for a lot of money and whatever. I think I was just born lucky in that department, and I can't really explain it. Orthopedically, I'm still really good. A year ago, now almost 2 years ago, as I was preparing for my 50th anniversary of Boston, I thought to myself, geez, 50 years ago you used to run 100 miles a week. Why don't you try and do that again? And I did it. And I ran 1:00 in that week. It wasn't pretty. At the end of the week, my knee was kind of sore, and I worried that I had damaged something. But I took 2 weeks off afterwards. There was no gain, and I was totally whole again. I've been totally fine ever since. So I was born lucky in the orthopedic world. I think, I obviously think that running is a forward and back movement like walking. It's not skiing, it's not basketball, it's not tennis, it's not torquing, and those kinds of things are, a lot tougher. I haven't done a lot of those things, so I haven't had
So
any.
personally, do you cross-train at all, or do you focus
Yeah,
on strength?
I didn't, when I was a top runner, all I did was run, and I mean, that was all I did, because it felt like we were running a lot, and we were pretty tired, and we weren't professional runners. My big goal in life is still to have somebody give me a $10 check in a race. I haven't gotten there yet. I've got trophies and other crap, but no $10 checks, that's the level I want. But, no, I didn't even strength train, and you know, I do go to the gym. I'm retired now, I've got time, I go to the gym, I throw weights around. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever, but it kills a couple of hours in the week, and it's fine, and gives me something to do, and I go to the grocery store afterwards, or whatever. I like ellipticals. I spend an hour a day at home on my recumbent bicycle. But it's really not exercise. I'm just sitting there. What it is it keeps me awake, because otherwise if I read, I'll fall asleep. It keeps me awake while I'm reading newspapers, magazines, journal articles, Runner's World, whatever it is I'm reading. And I've really, really come to enjoy that time that I spent on the bike. So I do think I'm an exercise addict. I don't feel good unless I do quite a bit of exercise most days. I think it's largely a positive addiction. And I've been lucky. So far it hasn't come home to haunt me. Tomorrow, who knows? Moss.
But, so, just to tag on what Hank was asking about, I mean, that's kind of for you, I guess, but in your experience, because I guess from what I hear you say is like, you sit on the recumbent bike, but you don't really need to do that per se. I mean, you need to do it for your exercise addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But for us ordinary people out here, like, can you talk about cross training, yoga, strength training, and how that can, keep you running longer, running forever per se?
Yeah, I can tell you all about stretching. I actually did some a month ago, and I got an injury in my butt. For 2 weeks, and it'll be a long freaking time before I go back to stretching. Of course, I believe in all movement and all productive fitness. I love walking. I'm perfectly good walking. I go out and walk at a pretty good pace, probably 6 or 8 miles a week, in addition to other stuff I do. If I had a walking partner who I could yak with, I would walk forever. I had one of those previously in Pennsylvania. We had a wonderful time. Bicycling, great, except I'm afraid of bikes because people fall off them and break things, and I'm too old to want to break something. Yeah, I believe in all fitness things, and I believe everybody's got to do something, certainly do a lot more than most Americans are doing. I've been able to expand my wheelhouse a little bit, but not a lot. Mentally and physically, I can't do yoga. It's just like, no, I can't do it. Give me a break. This is as far as I go, and I don't like the mentality of slowing down and, being still. Peace now, or whatever it is that you do when you do yoga. That doesn't work for me, but if it works for anybody else, I'm not gonna say no. Yes.
So, my first running book I read was one written by Jim Fix.
Yeah.
Did you run with him?
Yes.
And he would talk about interval training,
Sure.
and he said if you weren't a runner, just get out and walk, and if you can walk a block, try running the second block.
Right.
Recover, and he talked about nutrition.
Yeah. No.
And
He
my
did it-
first pair of shoes was my tennis shoes, so there
Right,
you go.
right. And Jim Fix did it all in 1978. I probably met Jim in 78 or so when he became famous. And Jim Fix was the slowest runner I ever met in my life. We could not understand why anybody would want to run a marathon in 3 hours and 8 minutes. Give me a break. That was absurd, right, John? I mean, we couldn't even, what's the point? Because that's what we didn't understand in 1978. Jim was the most beautiful gentleman you could ever hope to meet. Loved running dearly. Worked all day at his journalism and rewarded himself at the end of a day with a 10-mile run at his own pace. I did one with him. I'm very, very good friends with his son, a Wesleyan graduate, who is just an incredible person and coach and father and friend and all-around great guy. He, the son, has been going to the Cooper Clinic for 30 years to make sure that he doesn't have whatever issues his father had. So far, so good. You know, we all learn in this life that there are no guarantees. You know, none of us came with a lifetime guarantee, or I guess we did, but we don't know how long a lifetime is, or any of that. But Jim was fantastic. His son is fantastic. The family is wonderful. His son coaches young runners at a small private school in Connecticut now, and does a great job.
Well, how come the Nigerian runners and the Kenyan runners are so dominated? There's no body there.
Yeah, I followed that subject as closely as you can follow it for the last 30 years, and everyone assumed that there would be an answer as soon as there was DNA tests and genome sequencing and all of that. And 30 years later, no one's really got an answer. There are all these silly hypotheses out there, but actually nobody knows. It's pretty clear at this point that it's not one gene that does it. It's many, many of them interacting. But the results of the Rift Valley runners is just, it's the most astonishing thing in sports, that people from a tiny, tiny little part of the world absolutely dominate marathon running worldwide. You know, much more than we even know in this country, because you don't ever hear about anything but Boston and New York. But there are 50 marathons like that in Europe and the rest of the world, and the Kenyans and Ethiopians win them all. It's astonishing.
Regarding that, has there been theorizing about the collective consciousness of the society, where you look at Scandinavian small populations, which doesn't mean that there's necessarily a lot of talent,
Right.
because the probability is lower than when you have huge populations. But has there been speculation about when you get a whole society that is devoted to that sport, you know, the fans, then how much of a role would that be? You can't measure that, obviously, but I would tend to think that that's a huge factor.
Well, of course, but it's also true that Scandinavia is almost nowhere in the distance running world now. I mean, they've had a couple of
Well,
runners.
skiing, I'm thinking skiing.
Oh, skiing,
You're
well,
right, I didn't
right,
remember that
yeah,
the running
no,
world
skiing,
also.
absolutely.
But
I mean,
skiing, that's always
Well,
been
sure,
the national.
you can't do that in
The
Kenya.
NFL.
The thing with running is a worldwide sport. You can do it anywhere in the world. And I keep saying this to people, and it's like, you know, running is a non-skilled, non-talent sport. Not talent, but it's a non-skilled sport. You know, you crawl, you walk, you run. Everybody who's able-bodied learns to run. You know, you don't need a coach, you don't need a lot of things. You can just run to your heart's content if you're able-bodied. And so running is sort of the perfect laboratory to test whatever is the physiology. Because skiing you can only do if you got snow, and tennis you can only do if you're rich, and swimming you can only do if you're rich, and a lot of sports like that. Running everybody can do. So how do we explain the fact that this small group of people from one corner of the world wins everything? And the Peruvians don't win, even though they're at altitude, and the Himalayans don't win, even though they're at 29,000 feet. So it's altitude plus, 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 plus. It's a fascinating topic. It's a fascinating topic. There are so far no answers, really. Yeah.
So along those lines, as a career journalist, is there one story or one subject that you found most intriguing and fascinating in running a career?
Many, many, but I'll tell you the one that comes to mind most quickly. And I don't know why, but I guess my wife and I have been talking about it for a while. In about 1995, I was the editor of Runner's World, and Hal Higdon was one of our better runners. And Hal called me up, or wrote me, did we have email, wrote me a letter. He said, hey, I want to write a story about how running makes you smarter. And I fell on the floor laughing, pissed my pants. I mean, it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Tell me that running gives you a strong heart, or I just thought this is ludicrous. We should not go over the board and start promising people that running was going to deliver cognitive benefits. Of course, that's been the only story of the last 20 years, and it's Now it's absolutely the clearest thing anyone can imagine. You know, if you're pumping blood, anywhere you're pumping blood is a good thing, and pumping blood to the brain has got to be a good thing. You know, there are not nearly as many answers as there are in the cardiovascular world, but the ongoing research is just fascinating. And I mean, we all know that running or exercise makes us feel better on a daily basis. Connecting it to various brain functions is difficult, to be sure, but as with obesity in one of the slides, you know, we live in a world where everybody my age at least is concerned about Alzheimer's and cognitive decline, and everybody's seen it in a member of their family at some distance, and it's a real deal. And you know, any little thing we can do to nudge the needle, it's got to be a good thing. So that's what comes to mind. I really like the health and fitness stories. You know, there's so many great stories in running. You've got 30,000 runners in the Boston Marathon. Most of them are worth a story because there's something that has gone into getting them there. So it's fascinating to talk to people. Yes.
I want to say the little anecdote of Jamaica Pond, Jamaica Plains, just outside of Boston. 1975, Andy, my brother, and I are out there jogging around Jamaica Plain, and we look across the pond, and there's this guy running perpendicular to us. And I don't know if you said it, you didn't remember it clearly. I don't know if you said it or I said it. I said, look at the stride on that guy over there. He's going to amount to nothing. But he had cameras following. Amby's good friend, my good friend, Bill Rogers, had just set the American record the day before, and he of course had a stride that nobody could maintain without wrecking their Achilles tendons. He was up.
I agree with you.
You remember the comment that they couldn't find any Runner's World pictures where he had
Yeah.
because
Both of mine are on the ground at all times. Opposite of Bill.
I have one more question. So in other professional sports, and I'm just going to use tennis, Serena Williams has her urine tested right after she wins the
Right.
tournament. Well, what happens when those Olympic or those world-class runners cross the finish line at Boston and New York? Do they have to take a test?
Oh, they get tested much more closely than Serena.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Right afterwards?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Any cheating?
Yes, and you know, at one point I had the romantic version that everyone in Kenya, Ethiopia was, you know, God's gift to distance running and whatnot. It turns out now we know there's a lot of doping going on there. I mean, Kenya, I've been to Kenya several times, the runners are fantastic, but as a society, Kenya is the exact extreme of the worst example of capitalism run amok you can possibly imagine. Everybody's looking for a way to make a buck, and they'll do anything to make a buck, including dope and road racing. And several of the Boston Marathon winners and Chicago Marathon winners were found a year or two later to have been using drugs at that point, and they were stricken from the records in most of the cases, but the organizations never had any way to get the money back and to give it to the rightful person in third or fourth place or whatever to pass it down. Now they withhold the money for not a number of years, but I think they pay it out on an annual basis rather than giving people a big pot. So if it's found out a year later that someone has cheated, they've still got 2/3 of the money to redistribute the way it should be. It's unfortunate that they have to spend so much resources, time, effort, and money to do this, but you have to.
You remember Montreal, the East Germans?
Oh, sure.
And did Sierpinski, the winner of the gold medal, did he finally get his gold medal taken away?
No.
He didn't?
No.
Do you know why?
Yeah, because the Olympics won't do anything retroactively. They just won't.
Oh, you mean there's a time where it's considered retroactive?
If you don't fail a test,
Oh,
when you finish the race, then you were clean in that race,
So
and they
he
can't.
didn't fail the test?
I don't think so. I
Yeah.
don't even know how much testing there
Many
was in
East
'76.
Germans.
We all know there
That's
was
history
systematic
after the race.
doping by
That's
the
what I
East
know
Germans
about
that almost surely
for that
includes
race.
Drapinski, Frank Shorter should have won a second gold medal instead of
And
gold.
Don Cardone.
And Don Cardone
From
should have got,
fourth to
but no,
bronze,
trust
yeah.
me, they've never seen those medals and they never will.
I didn't know if they
Sadly.
could pull that off, yeah,
Sadly.
especially Frank being a lawyer.
Yeah, they would like to. Moss, should I let everyone go?
Yeah, if there's, unless anybody has a final question, or, again, we,
Oh, I'm willing to keep going, but I don't.
yeah, no, we thank you for coming. Come to our 5K tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming.
Refreshments and books over on the table.
We have our picture taken with him because he's good friends with them.
Have something to eat.
Many, many times.